Thank you all very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and to such a large audience. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules and days to be here. And I really, when I build talks, I build it from the perspective of if I was sitting in your shoes, what would I want to know and how to be helpful? So I'm really hoping that comes about today for you all as well. And I do want to, again, thank the committee that put this together to make this happen, to get me all in front of you here today. So first and foremost, we're going to talk anxiety. Lots of it and kind of hopefully learn, but why talk about it? So first and foremost, just to know, about 1 in 10, and we'll talk, we all deal with anxiety, but about 1 in 10 elementary to high school students are walking around with anxiety being at a debilitating place, what we might call an anxiety disorder. And at the same time, what we now know too, is that 1 in 6 kids will meet any criteria for a psychological disorder at any time. So our understanding the reasons why that's happening, we could speculate, but at the same time, we know that issues are happening in our kids and youth. And with that in mind too, why we want to focus on anxiety specifically is because what we know is anxiety usually shows up first. It's one of the first things that shows up when we're younger. And what we know is if we treat it, we can change outcomes. If we don't, left unchecked, we find other mental health issues can start to more get in the picture, whether it's just part of the puzzle or correlational, we haven't completely figured out. But starting with anxiety, and if we catch it early, we can really change trajectories. So that's partially why we start with it. And at the same time, what goes along with anxiety are mood issues, depression, different things. When it's not treated young, we start to see more of that in high school. And what we also know, I'm going to show you, when we treat anxiety, underlying anxiety, we also see scores improve on depression scales. I see that all the time. It's a beautiful thing when we treat that anxiety, people's mood and their depressive symptoms seem to go down. The other reason of why I've dedicated my life to this cause is it has some of the most powerful impact on people. It really can be such a destructive force, anxiety in someone's life. And the thing is, the sad part about it, it's the most treatable thing. We'll talk about that. But we know the most how to treat this issue. And we still see people suffering from it all the time. So that's part of my job and my role, is to try to help get this information out there and help to make people's lives better. So in that way, let's kind of jump in and begin. So first and foremost, what you should see in front of you are 2 dolphins sort of in the ocean, nicely playing in the beach. But if you see anything else, you deal with anxiety. This was a Harvard sort of picture, changes chemicals in the brain, and people see all sorts of strange things. They see, I've heard, it's strange as like cows. I can't even believe that someone might see a cow or a camel, but they see all sorts of things, and that happens because your brain chemistry changes when you're dealing with anxiety. So just know if you're seeing anything but 2 dolphins, you're probably in the right place right now. So what I mean by that, and we want to start with, we all need anxiety. And this is why. So anxiety is a functional thing. So in preparation for this talk, I'll share a quick little funny story. I wanted to have you have this experience of a cobra in the room. So I went on Amazon.com looking at all these nice little cobras, stuffed animals that looked huge in the picture. We ordered it on Prime. I'm all excited. It was going to be here tonight. And they showed up, and they were this big. It didn't have quite the same effect. But I wanted to share it, but in that way. So maybe I wasn't meant to create that experience of a cobra in the room. But if a cobra was in the room, I want you to picture me literally throwing it onto your table, and it's in front of you right now. This is what I mean by functional biological anxiety. This is what this system was created for. We know where it is. It's back here in the back of our head. It's our amygdala. And its job is to scan environments for danger. And when it sees danger, it's supposed to go off and take over. And it wants to get us to safety. And so it's making a quick decision in your brain. Am I going to kill that cobra, or am I getting out of the room? And sometimes if you get too much of that anxiety adrenaline response, instead you might freeze. So a lot of you may have heard of deer in the headlights or freezing. That's because that system took over, but you got it in such a wallop that you froze instead of quick reaction. And so in that way, what I want you to start thinking about is we need anxiety. It's a built-in protection system. It's evolutionary, and it works great under conditions of biological anxiety. So a cobra in the room, unfortunately, we have to talk about this in schools, a gunman in the building, things like that. Those are life or death situations, and that's what this system was geared towards. And it turns on every part of your body needed to do that. So first off, and we'll talk, it turns on all that adrenaline, it gets your heart racing, gets your body moving, it puts your energy into your core, it again makes you feel flush because all that heat is coming to your core, you're sweating, and again, your thoughts, and this is adaptive, narrow on the threat. You're not thinking about me talking right now if there's a cobra in the room. You're not thinking about dinner. You're not thinking about homework. You're locked into the threat, and you are focused on it. And you see that cobra in such detail, figuring out, is it striking, what's it doing, but you're getting yourself to safety. And that's what anxiety does and does well. And it's gearing, remember, to avoid and keep us safe. But here's the rub, and why you're all in this room, is we're not just animals. We evolved. We have what I call a smart brain. So in that thing, now there's things, instead of biological protections, now there's things we're psychologically afraid of. And if you ever wondered, why does this make me anxious? Why does talking in front of a whole group of strangers, why does raising my hand in class, why does meeting new people make me anxious? Is because that threat system has detected that what you're doing right now could lead to a psychological failure or a psychological bad outcome. And here are the things that system tries to protect us from. All anxiety can be boiled down to one of these 5 fears. A fear of being alone or rejected, a fear of being out of control, a fear of failure, a fear of disappointment, or a fear of death itself. And so our anxiety system has decided that if I raise my hand right now, that could lead to rejection or failure. And think about it, what's the best way to keep yourself safe from a snake? It's to avoid it. So you avoid raising your hand so you don't fail. And so first off, again, to keep rolling on this, you gotta understand there's some basic ideas that anxiety you hear all the time out there is illogical. It's actually very logical. And the logic of it is if you avoid it, you stay safe. If you don't want to get bit by the cobra, stay away from it. And it works, as I said, under good conditions of biological threat. But now comes the psychological threat. So let's say, for some of you in this room, it's that time applying for college, SATs, PSATs, ACTs. So now that same system detects a threat, failure, and it doesn't want you to fail. So it goes off like it's supposed to. But the way it wants to keep you safe is to get you to avoid. So now it tries to get you to avoid the SAT. It says, don't talk about it. Don't even think about it. Whisper. Can't study. Clean your broom. Do anything but study for this test. You might fail. Don't even take it. Don't show up because you know you're going to fail. How well are you going to do on a test you can't study for or prepare for? You're going to fail. So the system works against us when it comes to our psychological anxiety. And this is what I've coined the irony of anxiety, is that conditions of biological threat works great. Conditions of psychological threat, when you listen to your anxiety, you're going to make that fear come true. So what we have to do, and this is what's so hard about anxiety work, is it's a natural evolutionary process that takes over your brain to get you to safety. And what good anxiety treatment's about is learning to interrupt that natural process, to go against that part of your brain telling you to avoid, because that will keep you safe, knowing that if you avoid, that's going to lead to that failure. So let me give you one more example of that. So let's say your biggest fear is being alone. Again, a very normal human fear. We all might experience it in some ways. So in that way, now your anxiety system is worried about it for you. So it wants to keep you safe. And remember, how it does it is tells you to avoid and how to avoid. So don't talk to people because they'll laugh at you. Don't go to parties because they're not going to like you. If you do, act fake because they're not going to like who you are. So now imagine you listen to your anxiety system as it's telling you. So you avoid going to parties, you avoid talking to people, you avoid being yourself. How do you wind up? Alone. So your fear comes true when you listen to your anxiety. It literally is the playbook for how to make your fear come true in these anxiety threat conditions. So now we're going to talk more about this whole thing. So the first thing to know in the fact that we said everyone has anxiety, but what makes something an anxiety disorder, or what makes it a preference? This is hard to untangle. So for example, I put broccoli. So imagine in that way, your kid says, I don't like broccoli. I don't want to eat broccoli. Is that an anxiety disorder? They're avoiding it. They don't want to eat it. So this is what we know, is if it's a preference, you can do it and then tell me you don't like broccoli. If you keep finding reasons to not eat it, it's probably more anxiety. And the more I push, the more you find creative ways to avoid, or you yell at me, storm out of the room, or throw the broccoli at me, but you're not eating that broccoli, we're probably dealing with more anxiety. But if you can eat that broccoli and say, see, Dad, I hate you, I can eat it, it's not a big deal, it's probably a preference. But what makes it, we all have anxiety, but what makes it a disorder now is two things. One, if it gets in the way of our ability to live, love, or laugh. So in that way, does eating broccoli really matter in my ability to eat, love, or laugh? And if there's other vegetables around and I don't care, probably not a big deal. But if I'm on a broccoli farm and the only thing my parents can serve me is broccoli, now it's a disorder because you need it to survive. If that's the only vegetable and you're avoiding it and you can't eat it, now it's a disorder. So for example, we all might have a fear of that cobra. It's kind of evolutionary. But we don't live in a lot of places where you have to deal with cobras. So we wouldn't call that a disorder. We would call that anxiety about it, but it's not a disorder. But now if you live in a place where there are cobras, and now you can't go out because you're worried the cobra might get you. You can't go to parties because you're worried about that cobra. Now that's an anxiety disorder. And that's when you want to get someone involved. when it's gotten to the point that it gets in the way of your ability to live, love, or laugh. What this is all about. So in that spirit, what are these disorders that you might be diagnosed with? And I want to explain it to you today because you might hear it all the time. Your doctor might tell you, or your doctor might not even know. So I'm going to help educate you to understand what's the difference between all of these types of anxieties. So hopefully you're going to leave a little more feeling like an expert. So the first kind of anxiety, and actually in our new DSM-5, to be clear, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is not an anxiety disorder. But I disagree, and I talk about it anyway. But someone might say, no, it's not in there, but it really is. And here's what OCD is for those of you that understand. So your alarm's job is to keep you safe. But imagine all day long, someone's feeding your alarm false data. So what I mean by that, someone says to your alarm, your hands are dirty right now. Someone keeps repeating, you're feeling dirty. Things aren't right. Go wash your hands is the smart brain response, because my hands are feeling dirty, and that's how I would solve that problem. But that thought and that thing keeps being repeated over and over, and you spend a lot of time doing things that you're getting false information on. And I do a lot of work too with all types of anxiety, but one type of OCD I just want to shed more light on is for mothers postpartum. We know a lot more about postpartum depression, but there's a lot of postpartum OCD, where you get these horrible thoughts about what you might do to your child. You never want to. They really bother you, but you're afraid to talk about them. And you feel like you have to either do something or you don't want to do it, and you're horrified. So you become really concerned about yourself. But that's what OCD is getting this false information over and over again. Now, selective mutism is where you're in an environment, and this is more with younger kids, where the expectation is to talk, and you can talk great, but you don't. So in school and classes, you're completely mute, but at home, you're a little chatterbox. That's selective mutism. Specific anxiety is, again, when it's a specific thing that isn't tied to some of these other big anxieties. So, for example, airplane flying, elevators, the dark. Kids between 5 and 8, by the way, develop about 30 to 40 different kinds of anxieties. Generalized anxiety. That is, if you answer yes to this question, I can't turn my brain off because I'm always worrying. I'm not really thinking about things, I'm really worrying about things. And it's really, I can work, I'm doing, but at night it gets really bad because I can't distract, and I'm up worrying at night, and it impacts my sleep. And it's beyond just being a mom or a dad who worries, but it feels like that constant oppressive worry. And a lot of people would shake their head yes to this. It feels like my brain's on a hamster wheel. If you're answering yes to that, it's probably this thing called generalized anxiety. Separation anxiety is where you're really afraid to be away from someone you love or care about, or worry something might happen to them, and you want to be around them to make sure they're okay. Social anxiety is where we're worried about the fear underneath is rejection. And any kind of performance anxiety is a type of social anxiety. And so that's any time I'm worried about the fear of rejection. I don't raise my hand, I don't go to parties, I don't date, I don't flirt. And another way that it can show up is I don't let people in. So I can be, everyone thinks I'm great, but no one really knows me. That's another way of social anxiety, a fear of letting people get close to you because you're worried of rejection. Panic disorder is where you get this really intense feeling of panic over your body, and usually it shows up in kids and parents because it feels so bad. You go to the nurse or the doctor or your school nurse and you say, I think I'm dying, something's really wrong with me. And then they run all the tests and they go, no, you had a panic attack. and it was so awful and horrible, now you're worried it might happen again, or you avoid places that it happened because you don't want it to happen again. And the last one is agoraphobia, and that's where we're afraid of getting trapped somewhere. So we're so afraid of getting trapped, we want to stay in places that feel safe, which is usually our home. So again, if you don't go to concerts, if you avoid crowds, and really the fear is being trapped in them, that's more agoraphobia. So now I'm going to quickly make you all experts. And how you figure out what your child or what you personally might be dealing with is you have to ask yourself this question. What am I afraid might happen? So let's take the phenomenon of raising your hand in class. So your kid doesn't raise their hand in class. They're getting lower marks in their participation because they won't raise their hand in class. You don't figure it out. You think it's probably the social anxiety. But you finally now know to ask them, well, what are you worried about? What's your worry brain telling you? And they say, the last time I raised my hand, I had a horrible panic attack. It felt awful. And I don't want to feel that again, so I'm just never going to raise my hand. What issue are we probably dealing with? Panic. Let's say it's, I'm getting these thoughts in my head that if I raise my hand, Dad's going to die in the next plane crash. And I don't want him to die. So I'm never going to raise my hand to Dan. Not specific. No. Remember, a thought, intrusive thought is popping in my head. OCD. What if the thought is, my teacher and friends will make fun of me, I can't ever get the answers right? Social anxiety. And so this is how you start to tease that out. The good news is it doesn't matter how much you tease it out, because the treatment looks pretty similar across the board. But if you want to feel more confident, if you want to Google search, now you know how to figure some of that out. So now, how does this anxiety that's normal cross over into a disorder? So I'm going to tell you the story of anxiety two ways, graphically and through a story. So here's the first. This is the graph. This is for the science people in the room. So let's say you have a test. And again, your anxiety system is going off because you're worried about failing the test and that it's not going to go well. So your anxiety is climbing, you're making yourself sick, you can't sleep, you're crying, you're upset, you can't think about the test. And a well-intentioned parent or teacher or someone says, this is too much. This is not something you have to deal with. Let's call and let's take away that test. And so you call, and they do. You don't have to take that test anymore. So now your anxiety goes, whoosh! Ah, I got out of that one. And you feel so good because you were so worried about that test. But this is what happened when that event happened. You've now taught your anxiety. This is what you do when you're feeling anxious. You avoid and you feel better. And also, what you've done is you haven't learned that skill of how to take that test because you're avoiding it. And you never got to the test and go, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought. So not only do you not have that test skill, you also don't have information that your anxiety was wrong. So now the next time another test comes around, same science class, now that anxiety spikes up, and you get caught up in this loop where you need to avoid. And I'm going to start talking to you in a little bit about 3 metaphors for anxiety, but one of them we're going to talk about is think of it more now like a fire. And whenever we get caught up in this loop, we're putting gasoline on the fire. And we're well-intentioned, and the thought is when I put out the fire here, that will put it out when I give it that gasoline, but it's the exact opposite. and it grows. It never stops. It will never stop with that one test. It will never stop with that one class. And when a fire gets too big, it starts to claim more territory. And then you start to take more. It's not just science class, it's science and math, the two hard ones. Then it's now anything that there's a performance measure I can't do. Then it's I can't go to school because I have to perform. And it grows and grows. And so what we're going to talk about, what good anxiety treatment involves, is learning to break that cycle. Is learning instead of avoiding, we don't get that phew, which is a good feeling. And we have to stick with it and persevere. And that anxiety stays a little higher, but when we stick with it and persevere, we learn those skills, we see how to do it. And it's hard in the beginning, but then the next time we do it, the peak is less. And then the third time we do it, that peak is less until we're not anxious about it at all. So that's the scientific version. Now the more story, narrative version. And for any parent that has a kid that deals with anxiety, for any kid in the room, or any teacher here, hopefully this can help you understand. So imagine in that way, I said, I want to make you all happy. Tigers for everyone. 8-pound cute white Bengal tigers, they're awesome. You get to take one home, take two if you want, feel free. And I say, already even start picturing them. I want you in your mind, give them a name. You're taking them home. You're picking it out. It's awesome. And imagine now you take it home and you're playing with it. It's not scary at all. It's super cute. Your pictures, Instagram's blowing up, Facebook. Can't believe what I got at the Depression Center talk. Tigers for everyone. I mean, it's awesome. And you're playing with it and your tiger gives you a little growl. It's not scary, but it growls. And you're trying to figure out, hey, what's that growl about? So you give it some food. And that was a huge moment. Because what did the tiger learn? If I want food, what should I do? And what did you learn? If I want you to stop growling, what should I do? And again, not scary at this point at all. But now imagine this happens and fast forward, let's say your kid now is in high school or that tiger. And every day you're feeding that tiger its food for 10 years, 12 years, for some of you 40 years, 50, 60 years. You're feeding that tiger every day faithfully. What's happening to that tiger? It's growing. And so when your kids are saying, I'm anxious, I can't take the test, from the outside, you see little tiger. We all see, why can't you? That's easy. You can do this, you've done it before. But that's not what they're seeing or experiencing. This is what they're experiencing. This is what they're feeling. And it only feels like the only thing I can do is to feed the tiger and avoid. And that's what that is. And anxiety work, which is hard and brave work, and why I'm blessed every day to see courage, is it's learning to stand up to the tiger and saying, you're not getting your food anymore. And that's a really hard thing to do. But just know, parents, that's what they're experiencing internally when they're dealing with their anxiety. But it's hard from the outside. You're still seeing that little tiger. So that's the story of anxiety, and I'm sticking to it. So in that way, as I said, I want to give you kind of 3 metaphors to leave today. And the first is, again, thinking of anxiety like a fire. And there are things we know that make the fire grow, and there's things we know that put out the fire. And so anytime we help our kids avoid, or we avoid ourselves, we're feeding the fire. Anytime we change environments so our kids don't have to feel anxious. That fancy term is called accommodation, and we're growing the fire. And now here comes the too much information part of this sharing. I always have to disclose, I'm not immune to this too. I was a very anxious kid, but one thing that made me very anxious when I was a kid was going to the bathroom in a public restroom, especially going number 2. That was kind of impossible. So my beautiful, kind, loving parents, what do you think they would do anytime we were out and that feeling or urge hit? One of them was taking me home. Super nice, super great, didn't impact my life too much. But then guess what happened? I never learned how to do that. The only thing that cured me and what the water was when you go to Europe and the nicest restroom is a McDonald's, you kind of get over that stuff. So in that way, anytime well-intentioned people help us avoid, we're feeding it. And remember, once we start feeding it, you think it's going to stop there. I promise you it will never stop there. It will grow and take more ground, and then you yourself feel like you have to keep feeding it. And it grows and grows. And usually when I see people more in high school, it feels really out of control and that there's nothing we can do to stop it. What is the water is learning how to do what it is that makes us anxious and eventually doing. And so that's really important. The only way to extinguish the fire is do what it is you're afraid of, but really hard to do. So, building on that metaphor, number 2, how do you know you might be dealing with that anxiety fire at your home? So 1 is if your student experiences a lot of bodily symptoms. My stomach hurts a lot. I get headaches, and especially around trying to avoid things, and they're complaining of a lot of somatic complaints, they're probably dealing with some anxiety and they might not know it. Because remember, that cobra in the room, it locks in and turns on all these body systems, but you're not seeing a cobra, you're seeing a test. So it's harder to see, but you're still getting that arousal. Sometimes they can name it, but a lot of times they can't. When you find that you have to give a lot of reassurance, by the way, that's another way to fuel the fire, telling your kids they're going to be fine, they're going to do great on that test, don't worry about it, it's going to go great. Anytime you reassure, you're also building the anxiety fire. But when you give and you feel like you have to give a lot of reassurance, that's a sign you might be dealing with anxiety. Another way you can see it, and I work with people a lot, when there's a lot of need for repeat clarification. If it's the 50th time you've shared the plans for Thanksgiving that's a week away, you're probably dealing with some anxiety. What are we doing again? How's that going to go? Who are we seeing? And you've done it for now the 40th time. There's probably some anxiety that they're wanting to hear again, and they're getting locked in. Whenever there's an avoidance of things, or they say, I prefer, I would encourage you to test it, but whenever there's avoiding, there's probably some anxiety. Any school people in the room, teachers, administrators, look at sick days. When I work with schools, and I'm working a lot with schools, anytime there's probably over 7 school days missed in a semester, I would recommend probably having a policy where they meet with a counselor to see if there's some underlying mental health concerns leading to that. And probably the number 1 reason is probably anxiety. The number 1, again, too, what makes it really hard with anxious people, too, if you notice your child has a lot of difficulty asking for help around things, and there's some classes they're just not doing well in, but they say they're fine because they like to take, but they consistently are underperforming, there might be some underlying anxiety. And more for schools, I call them your frequent flyers. that if I got in a school with a bunch of teachers, which I just did, and I said, write down the top 15, 20 people who you think deal with anxiety, they could. Or nurses stations, who are the people who keep showing up in your office all day long, especially a certain period, because they might be trying to get out or that period causes them anxiety. Or if you, as a parent, every day, English class, third period, you're getting a text, I'm freaking out here, help me. And you're saying, you'll be fine, don't worry, you got this. That's probably anxiety. So that's some of the smoke. But now that you know about it, you know how we need it, it's logical, adaptive, but in this way it's not, what do we do? How do we treat it? And so the metaphor I want to give you is think of anxiety treatment like a swimming pool. And what I mean by that, a swimming pool, or it's not a swimming pool, think of it like swimming. And the goal is, if I want to make you a good swimmer, and I'm thinking of changing this, by the way, to Colorado and having a skier up here. It kind of seems more fit, especially given the weather. But if I want to make you a good swimmer or skier, what do I have to do? I have to teach you some skills on how to do that. But if all we did was talk about swimming, watched YouTube videos about swimming, even pictured swimming, how confident of a swimmer do you think you could ever become if all we do is talk about it? You could become pretty good, but not great. The only thing that would make you a confident swimmer is if we get in the pool and swim. And so that key word, what you're looking for if your kid is in treatment or you're looking for treatment, is exposure. Exposure means we get them in the pool. And again, it's cruel, and you could do this, to throw your kid in the pool and say, good luck, go swim. And don't want you now to leave here and saying, I've learned accommodating you is all bad, we're done, good luck. If they're dealing, we want to make sure they have the skills to swim, but once they do, we got to make them get in the pool. And you as parents as well, if you don't feel confident that they know how to swim, you got to make sure they learn how. Once they know how and you're confident they do, letting them stay out of the pool is on you. You have to push them and figure out how to get them in the pool. And they need to learn how to swim in that way. So that's the key part. And what we know, and actually I have a slide that I just read in 50 years of studies that just came out, this awesome review. So there's a thing called a meta-analysis. And what they do is they review all the studies that ever came out about a mental health topic. And what we know is out of all the childhood issues that kids deal with, we are the best at treating anxiety by far. So a mean effect size of 0.63, which is in the moderate range. To give you an idea, depression is probably 0.3. So we are so much better at treating anxiety. And such that what that means kind of practically, that those who get treatment, 75% of people who come to a good, we all say we're anxiety experts. Now you know what you want to look for. But those that go to people who really know what they're doing improve 73% of the time they get better through treatment, more than no treatment at all, which is amazing for what we do. So, what does doing look like? So I developed this model and sort of looking at all the models in my work, and I'm going to explain to you this model, and then we're going to make it come alive. So in that way, this model I developed is called learning to face your fears. And it's important in that way. These are sort of the essential skills we need to swim. It's not all of them up there. It's some of them under each of these. So the first thing we need to know is to know that our anxiety is going off. And we need to be able to identify, this is my anxiety. So that's why it's feeling anxious with a question mark. But once we know it's anxiety, we want to label it, because sometimes part of the work with anxiety is learning to label it properly. Because if we're excited about something, it looks a lot like we're anxious about it. But if we label something we're excited as anxious in our brain, we're now going to avoid something we were excited about. So learning to figure out how to tell the difference is part of the work. But once we figure it out and we know we're anxious, just in the same way, what do you want to do when you're hungry? You want to eat. This will be what we want to do when we know we're anxious. This is not the playbook for when you're sad or lonely or upset. This is the playbook for when you're anxious. And the first thing you want to do is put a number to it, from 1 to 10. That's called scaling. And why that's helpful is, imagine all of you right now, I mean, we're getting close to ski season. For some it might be a little early, but imagine now you're driving on I-70. It's like 7:45. You got off to a little late start. You're feeling like you're beating traffic. All's going well. You're moving. And then you hear from someone in the car, "I got to go to the bathroom." Those dreaded words. And so you turn, because you don't want to get off. You know that's going to be an extra hour in traffic for that 5-minute stop. So you turn to that person and you say, "How bad from 1 to 10? And imagine they say it's a 10. So better or worse, what are you probably doing if it's a 10? You're pulling over. What if they say it's a 2? "Honey, can you hold it? Let's go. Let's do this." Tell me when it gets to a 7. In the same way, like anxiety, when it's lower, you can expect your child maybe to manage it and push. When it's higher, and just know, anytime that number gets above a 6, that's more Cobra in the room material, and your smart brain is going offline. You need your smart brain to deal with anxiety. So the next thing we have to do is learn how to get our smart brain back and interrupt this evolutionary process. And so how we do that is we learn to calm ourselves. Calming is what helps get our smart brain back. And that's a key thing, just so you know, there's a difference between a calming skill and a coping skill. A calming skill helps me get my smart brain back. Once my smart brain is back, now I have to deal with what I'm feeling or experiencing, and that's a coping skill. So if I'm so angry, I'm seeing red, and I'm throwing stuff, I need my emotion brain, this other part of our brain, think inside out, has taken over. I need to calm it to then learn to make a good choice and cope. What do I do with my anger? So in the same way, there are kind of comb the literature, and in my kind of program, there's 9 skills. I don't have time to do them all with you, but just know there's different skills out there that help us stay calm. But one of them that I love, and just know, is your breath. Your breath is portable. It doesn't draw attention to yourself. We can easily use it to calm ourselves down or to rev us up. But a way to breathe that's kind of a calming breath is called diaphragmatic breathing. So what diaphragmatic breathing looks like is we're going to breathe in our most yummy food in the world through our nose. So for me, I'm always on the quest for the best nachos in the world. I haven't really found much in Denver, but feel free when you do your eval forms, any places to try. I'm up for it. Challenge accepted. I'm on the quest. But in that way, so I'm going to picture nachos from where I found in Denver. El Camino seems to be the best for me so far in the Highlands. But in that way, we're going to breathe in through our nose, and then you want to blow out like you would on hot soup. So it should look like so now let me invite all of you to take 3 of those breaths. Breathe in that yummy food, whatever you're picturing. Blow out on hot soup. One more. Good. And then once we're in a calm place, then the anxiety work begins when we have our smart brain back. And so the first part of that anxiety work, I call it align and attack your worry brain. The first step is we have to get good at listening to our anxiety. And why this is really important is let's go back to the cobra. And now picture that cobra at your table again. And imagine I said to you what you hear all the time, just block out that cobra and pay attention to me. Don't think about that cobra, don't worry about it, just pay attention to me. How effective do you think you'll be at blocking out a cobra? Or if I told you, just don't think about it, pretend it's not there. If you're sensing a cobra and that's what the alert system is sensing, pretending it's not there is not going to work. What it does is it tells that system, you don't realize there's a cobra in front of you. What are you doing? Focus on the cobra. And it ups the ante. It doesn't down the ante. So I work a lot with a lot of professional athletes, and this is what they've heard their own life, block it out. That's the worst thing you can do. You want to acknowledge the anxiety, acknowledge the moment with some form of I hear you anxiety telling me whatever it's telling you what my anxiety doesn't want to blow up on an airplane. That's its favorite thing that it doesn't want to have happen to me. I hear you anxiety telling me not to get on that plane right now, that this is going to be the one that blows up. Okay, I hear you. We want to acknowledge it because once it feels heard, then it will calm down a little bit. When it doesn't feel heard and it feels ignored, it's going to worry more. Just as you as a parent, if you were worried about your child and they were tuning you out, that would make you more worried about them. But if they can slow down and hear your arguments and talk to you about them, you would get calmer. So that's really important. But once we hear our worry brain, then what we have to learn to do is to poke holes in its argument, to use our smart brain to talk back to it. So I've developed in that way a whole bunch of ways to talk back to our worry brain, but I want to give you sort of my top 3. And so the first one, what we can do with our worry brain is give it some perspective, because our anxiety loses perspective. To it, everything is a cobra. It doesn't differentiate a gardener snake from a cobra. Everything's a cobra. So what we can do is help it get some perspective by helping it see that. So what I call it is number 10, but using a number scale from 1 to 10. So in that way, but the anchor for that scale is a 10 is a cobra at your feet. If a cobra is at your feet, feel free to let your anxiety system take over and get you to safety. But if that's a 10, what is saying hi to that person in class on a life or death scale? What is getting that person's number at Starbucks? What is flirting with that person you're attracted to? What is presenting at class? So in that way, you can say, anxiety, this is a 2. It's not a 10. You need to calm down. We can handle this. We can handle 2s. You're blowing this out of proportion. So we can give it perspective. Another one is a lot of times anxiety doesn't care what works as long as it does. So it can use a lot of arguments, but what you can always ask your anxiety, where's your proof? You're going to fail that test. Being mindful that every test in the history of tests you've taken before, you've gotten all A's, it's telling you you're going to fail this one. Where's your proof? Where's your proof that they're going to laugh me out of the building if I raise my hand? Where's your proof that this is going to happen? And if there's not proof, why should I believe you? So that's another one. The third one is I grew up in the age of the Trix Bunny Rabbit commercial. Anyone remember that commercial? Let's do it together. Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids. So great marketing, everyone remembers that. But why this commercial is so important is there was the cereal kids, by the way, or teenagers in the room, that was actually pretty disgusting. But in the commercial, there were these kids, and they were eating it, and it looked awesome. And there was this rabbit trying to get the cereal. In every commercial, the rabbit would get in this big, elaborate disguise trying to get it, but they never would because the kids were on the lookout for the rabbit. They didn't know how the rabbit was going to show up that day, but they knew the rabbit was coming. And so when they would find the rabbit, they would say that tagline, "Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids," and basically the commercial was up, the game was over. The same is true with anxiety. It uses tricks. Here are some it uses on everyone. This is some of its top favorites. Deep down, you know I'm right. You can say whatever you want right now, but you know if you raised your hand, they're going to laugh you out of the building. It loves some form of the deep down trick because it controls your deep down. Another one it loves to use, it uses your body against you. You're not feeling right, so you must be wrong. Or it uses your heart rate, or it uses those bodily symptoms of anxiety against you to get you to avoid. Another one of its favorite tricks is, my mom installed this with me, and remember, too much information, is it loves to repeat itself. And it learns that if I say it about 3 or 4 times, then you'll believe it. So how this showed up in my life, what do you feel like for dinner? So I would say, I feel like Mexican. My mom might say, I feel like Chinese. And then she would go, are you okay with Chinese? No, I really want Mexican. Can we just have Chinese tonight? No, I really feel like Mexican. Come on, how about Chinese? Don't make such a big deal. Okay, Chinese. But repeating itself seems to be this powerful thing with anxiety that if I keep repeating, you start believing. So those are some of the ones it uses on everyone. But another one, remember, and what we want to start thinking about anxiety, kind of like your ultimate chess opponent. You're playing chess in your brain, and it learns through your experience. So a lot of kids I work with imagine in that way, you as parents said, you have to go to school. I don't care, that's our line, you're going. And their anxiety doesn't want them to go for whatever reason. But you're adamant, so they're going. But now imagine one day they get a sore throat. And now it's a game changer. So you say, well, you have a sore throat. Of course you can stay home. You're sick. What did anxiety learn keeps you home? Being sick. So now the sickness may have passed, but what do you think that kid starts feeling in their body? Their throat feels clammy or sore or swollen. And they say, I must be sick. And they go to the doctor, no, you're not sick. Because now anxiety's learned a new trick. It has a new tool to get you to avoid. And it learns all sorts of tricks. So learning, the last thing you can do is learning to call out its trick. In the same way, silly anxiety, I know what you're up to. You're just repeating yourself. That doesn't make it more true. I'm now not going to follow you. The last one I didn't put up here. So now we have, you can call out its trick, you can give it some perspective, you can ask for proof. But one of my favorites, and actually what I use the most, is you can use a values-based challenge. And what I mean by that, there are some values that are more important than not being anxious. And this is what I use to fly all the time. So I say to my anxiety, my mission in life is to be in different cultures, to travel the world, to see family. And I know you're going to punish me for however long this flight is. And I might even die in this process. But I am getting on that plane because this is worth it to me. This is more important than not being anxious. If you want to be in a relationship, if you want to be in a career, whatever that might be, that's more important than not feeling anxious in this moment. So learning to say some values are more important than just feeling okay, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So that's the next thing we want to do. As we said, back to, we've now, if you kind of, you'll see this comes alive pretty quick. We want to scale it, calm it, put holes in it, but now we still have to do what our anxiety doesn't want us to do. So this is the one that parents love, and this is the one parents usually jump to. You want to jump to problem solving, but now problem solving with a twist. How do we problem solve whatever you're anxious about without avoiding? Not with avoiding, not with getting out of it, but without avoiding. So imagine in that way, you were really worried your teacher is mad at you, so you don't want to go to school because you're worried about how they're going to think about you. And so that's what the worry is about. You've talked back to it, but now you still have to go to school. How might you problem solve around that without not going to school? I'll throw out some. Maybe you can email the professor the night before, I'm concerned. Maybe you can make sure to go to the office hours and talk about it. Maybe you can write a letter about your concerns. So you're not avoiding, you're still going to school and you're trying to deal with it, but that doesn't mean you have to directly talk to them. But we're coming up with solutions that are not about avoiding. The next thing is one more skill that can help us do is anytime we rehearse anything and we practice it, that decreases our avoidance. So if there's teachers you're afraid of, tests you're afraid of, talking in public, let's practice it. Let's do it over and over, and the more we do it, especially SATs, those things, the more we practice it, the easier it gets. So rehearsing is important. Another part of rehearsal is sometimes what gets us to avoid is because we don't know how. So another thing which is beautiful about living in this time over any time is there's nothing you can't learn in 5 minutes in today's world. There's nothing that's not a YouTube or Google search away. And so anxious people do have this kind of, I don't know if you've heard the work of Carol Dweck and kind of mindsets. Anxious people get more wrapped up in this fixed mindset, either I got it or I don't. They don't think I can learn it. They don't think, oh, if I don't know how to give presentations, let's Google how to give presentations. Let's practice them and I can get better. They believe you either got this presentation gene or you don't. You got the flirting gene, you got the social gene, or you don't. And they don't think, I can learn it and get better at it. And so anytime, what we also do is anything that makes you anxious, the more you learn about it, the more you study it, it's going to decrease your avoidance. So I call those micro skills. So then we gotta, now that we've kind of learned these things, then we gotta go do what we're afraid of. And then we look back and see if our anxiety was right. And we're always going to find one or two outcomes. Outcome one, my anxiety was right, but I survived. Outcome two, because remember it's psychological, it's not biological. Outcome two, my anxiety was wrong in these ways, and therefore it could be wrong again. So to see these things come alive, I'm going to ask for 2 brave volunteers. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, I call it actually I usually use jelly beans, but I found some gum that will do the same trick. Your job is to try some gum in front of a large group of people and to use the skills to try some gum. 2 volunteers, that's the challenge. Anyone up for some gum? 1? 1 more. Come on down, as they would say on The Price is Right. Thank you. So everything anxiety related, remember there's a twist. So this is special gum. Have any of you ever heard of the game Bean Boozled? So Bean Boozled is there's these jelly beans that could either be super yummy or super gross. I found gum like that. So either this gum, exactly. So back to kind of the skills, but either this way, just so you know, you're either going to wind up with a barf-flavored piece of gum, and it really does taste like it, or winter fresh gum. So that's what you might wind up with. So now we're going to go through these skills you just saw. So what number is on your anxiety meter now, knowing in front of a big group of people, you're going to either get a barf gum or winter fresh. What number are you at? 5.
I go to 5.
A 5. And remember, when we start getting to about a 5 or a 6, that smart brain goes offline. So we might want to use that breathing now to help us kind of get our smart brain, or we might still have our smart brain with us. In that case, we can move on. But just for practice, everyone take few nice deep breaths. Good. Now give me 2 things your anxiety is telling you, 2 worry brain thoughts. I'm going to puke. I don't want to try it anymore. Is it on repeat, just repeating itself? We got a good anxiety response. Perfect. So now what you can practice and what's going to happen, I'm going to be your anxiety, and you got to talk back to me. You can use any of these tools or your own, but you have to have the last word in our debate, each of you. Okay? You are definitely going to puke. Don't do this challenge. What could you say back to that?
You haven't given me a bucket, so it's probably wintergreen.
Well, I haven't given you a bucket yet, but you still could puke.
It could happen.
It could happen. You don't want to do this. Stay out of this. So who won that challenge? Anxiety. We don't want anxiety to win. So try one of these. It's just a 2. It's just a piece of gum. Or where's your proof? I'm going to get the bad one. Or you're just repeating yourself. That's a silly trick. Throw one of those out.
I can handle puke. I've got 3 small kids.
Beautiful. All right. Now on to you. Don't do this. Just go. You don't want to do this in front of everyone.
It's not going to be a long time. I'll just...
Oh, you don't know how bad this is. The taste is going to linger forever.
Forever.
Oh, it will be. It's going to ruin gum for you forever. Don't do this. Good job. That's that A step. Now, this is where that problem solving comes in. If you're worried about aftertaste or worried about puking, what probably should we have up here? We could have chasers, meaning water, but probably you were correct. Anyone have a trash can? Probably a good thing to have. So let's just grab that little trash can over here. Because you never know. And if anyone would like to quickly grab one of their waters, but that's what problem solving looks like. We're not avoiding the challenge, but we're figuring out how do we prepare for it or what do we do to make it happen. And again, there's nothing we can rehearse. You all know how to chew on some gum. But in that way, imagine you really were worried about foods. What would be the Google term you might search or YouTube video you might watch to help you get better with the skill of eating gross foods? How to eat gross foods. That's simple. Not tricky. How to eat gross foods. How to keep gross foods down. How to not throw up when eating gross foods. And you might learn some tips like hold your nose so you don't have that olfactory sense. Things like that.
Feed them to your sister.
What?
Feed them to your sister.
There we go. That would be avoidance. Correct. Your wife pointed that out. You're learning. Learning's occurring. So beautiful. So now we go and we do. So you can pick. Which one do you think? And I should have joined you. I only brought 2. I am.
You can have mine.
We can split it half and half. How about that? So let's come on over, y'all. And cheers.
Thumbs up.
Bottoms up. Cheers.
It's the good stuff.
That's the good stuff. We got two good stuffs. Woohoo! Can I have a thank you for our volunteers? So when you come to my clinic, the first thing we do after you learn this stuff is we eat a jelly bean. So I have a big supply of Bean Boozled, or now maybe some gum, to have some fun with. But it's sort of bringing this out, and then we start applying it to more of the things that really make you anxious. But in that way, these are the tools that help us. But remember, we gotta get in the pool. That's the only thing that's going to eliminate anxiety. You can't be comfortable your whole life saying you don't have to get in the pool. So now, based on today, I'm going to challenge you. So I come from both an educational background, and as you hear, I work in the military. And sort of both those cultures believe if you don't have an acronym, it's not real. You got to have an acronym for everything to make it important and make it real. So I'm going to challenge you to act. And what I mean by act is, first off, now you know, be a little more of a detective around that smoke. To wonder more if this is anxiety, and feel comfortable asking a few more questions. Why are you avoiding this? What's your worry brain telling you? What's going on? And try to start to look for what that anxiety might be, or if you know it's anxiety, trying to figure out what that might be to go to your doctor. My kid is dealing with agoraphobia. Where are your providers in the area that work with this kind of model? So learning to assess. Another thing I will challenge you to assess is the quality of treatment. If it's a friend, if you're here at this talk, not everyone knows what good quality treatment's about. So you might hear a friend say, yeah, my kid has really bad anxiety. I can't come to the party. And you're close enough friends that you start talking and they're like, yeah, we just started seeing this therapist. What are they doing? If a person says, I love my therapist, all we do is talk, they're awesome, it's great, but guess what's not getting better? Their anxiety. If they say, I hate going to therapy, they make me do all this stuff, and it's torture, they might not love it, but guess what's getting better? And in the end, they appreciate it, is their anxiety. So learning to be better assessors of the quality of treatment, what might be getting in the way of them getting help if you work for a school, learning to, in that way, assess their own desire to change. The nice thing about anxiety is it feels so bad, that tiger inside, that most people are motivated to get rid of it. So with other issues, it can be harder, but anxiety is a little easier to get people to try. You can start to challenge beliefs that they can't handle things. You know more than they, in that sense. Believe that they can handle more than you think. And also challenge this idea that nothing can get better. And challenge this idea, one thing I'll also share with you, we hear a lot, and I hear a lot, from teenagers, from kids who've gone to pretty good treatment, these skills don't work. They just make it worse. And I want you to be able to challenge that. So let me explain to you why that happens. So it happens for 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is they learn it wrong. So they're like, I do that breathing stuff, it doesn't work. And I say, show me that breathing. Nope, that ain't gonna work. That's gonna make you more anxious. I can see why. Number 2 is the first time they try doing this skill is in the moment of sheer anxiety. And when we're that anxious, we're not gonna do anything new when a cobra is about to bite you. We go back to what we know. So in that way, if you want these skills to work, you have to be practicing them all the time, and then let those skills come out in those moments, not to pull them out for the first time and dust them off in those moments. But the biggest reason of all is I want you to think about this like a chess match or the biggest epic battle in your mind. Game of Thrones is coming back out in April. Think Harry Potter. Think Lakers versus Celtics. I'm from California. You know where I align. Think political parties, however you are in this room. Think big epic battles. And this is the battle you're facing when it comes to anxiety. And your enemy is always starting with the first shot. Be anxious. The Celtics score first. And so now you come down and you're trying to reestablish control via a calming skill. So you're trying to shoot. And you are, and you're starting to get kind of effective at it. But does anxiety like that? No. Anxiety doesn't want to lose. It believes you have to stay safe by avoiding. So it kicks back a response. So a lot of times if you deal with panic, when you're starting to calm yourself down and starting to feel like, okay, I made it through, you get this burst of anxious energy. That's anxiety fighting back. But we misinterpret that moment as, oh, this breathing is making it worse. As opposed to this breathing is working so well, my anxiety is fighting back. And so we mislabel those moments as things getting worse, as opposed to we're making it better. So you can challenge this idea that these skills don't work, and that's why. You can also challenge in that way, as I said, the quality of care, and you can help challenge that nothing works. And you can teach them anything you learned today. This is not, doesn't have to be rocket science. You can teach them, even little kids as young as 3 who I work with. You have a worry brain. Its job is to worry about you. Our job is to learn to talk back to it. It can't be the boss of us. And little kids love to say, you're not the boss of me. So if there's one thing you can say you're not the boss to, it's your worry brain. So learning that you can adapt this, you can apply it, teaching your kids early to calm their bodies, learning how, teaching how to talk back to our worry brain, teaching how to problem solve, to learn, to not avoid, are all skills. And so start teaching. And then remember, a good teacher holds their students accountable. Because part of the thing too with anxiety is they will say anything when they're anxious to get out of the room. Anxious people hate the spotlight. They don't mean to lie. That's not their intention. But they will say anything to take the spotlight off. Oh yes, of course I'm going to do that 10-page paper in an hour. Oh, of course, my grades are great. Don't worry about it. They're going to say what one person said, they say what they wish was true, not what is actually true, but it's in spirit of getting the spotlight off of them. So learning to hold more accountability, to check in. You said this was going to happen, let's make sure. Let me verify. I know your anxiety can be tricky. I know it can get the best of you. And when we're working well with anxiety, ideally in a family, it should feel like everyone, including your kid, against the anxiety, not parents versus child. So now, let's talk about some more tips and tricks. So first off, some tips for schools and teachers. Really fast, if you're in the room, then model for good anxiety treatment. And this is true for parenting, but I'll give another quote. How do we prepare and not spare? How do we help? So a lot of times what's hard for traditional IEPs and 504s is we want to build in these specific accommodations that should carry through for years, lifetimes, but that's not what we want to do with anxiety. We want to do that with other things. But what we want to learn to do is what I call scaffold-based accommodations. So imagine I'm so anxious I can't take tests in class right now. And it's test anxiety. So what that might look like as a teacher, that might be, all right, while you're learning these swimming skills, and we have to make sure you're learning them, so either through your school counseling program or an anxiety program or something, you're learning them. But while you're out of class, taking your test, because we don't want you to get behind, you're learning these skills. But in a month, you need to come to 10 minutes of the class in the beginning and do the test. Then you can leave and have extra time. Then month 2, you're in for half the test. Then month 3, you're in for 3/4. Then month 4, you're in the whole time with extra time. Then month 5, we remove the extra time. Or if your anxiety, social anxiety, you can't raise your hand in class, month 1, you're writing your answers and that can be participation. And I'm grading it. Month 2, you're raising your hand once, I'm not calling on you, but you're still turning in your answers and circling what you might have said if you did raise your hand. Month 3, you're raising your hand and I'm going to call on you once in the class period. You know it when you raise your hand, I'm going to call on you. Month 4, you're now not going to know, but you're going to be called on twice. Month 5, fair game, you're back to what every student does. And that can also be, too, for teachers. Okay, you can come to my office hours and we'll practice, and you'll have to answer questions that I throw out to get you more prepared. But being creative and using that creative energy as teachers is really important. As I said, for schools, learning to look at attendance patterns as maybe some signs and potential mental health issues. And my recommendation would be over 7 in a semester. Probably it's easy to pull that report and maybe asking for them to come in and just check in with the counselor. Or anytime they come to you with an accommodation, my doctor says, hey, I don't need to do tests anymore, I have test anxiety. Now going, I'm glad we know, but that's not what we're going to do. That's not our school policy. We're going to make sure you have to enroll in our anxiety group, but then we're going to get you back on track so you can do tests in your life. So in that last thing, in that way, just know anxiety does not equal staying out of the pool forever, even at schools. So now for parents. At the same time, how do we prepare and not spare? This will be my motto, and this is my motto with my kids. Yes, this makes you anxious, and I know you can handle it. Not but, or not therefore, and you can do it. So make sure, as a parent, that you feel confident that they know how to swim. If you don't, find someone that makes sure and can verify and make sure they have the swimming skills they need. Once you know that they know how to swim, your job is to keep finding environments that get them into the pool. And I learned we have this beautiful luncheon about at the Depression Center about multimedia use. It was awesome. But I learned something about our generation of parenting that kind of fits this. Do you know what we're called? We're called the lawn mowing parents. We try to clear all obstacles out of our kids' path so they don't have to feel this anxiety. But we want that to change. We're not helicopters anymore, we're lawn mowers. So in that way, your job is to not remove the barriers. Your job is to make sure they can mow the lawn themselves. And by pushing them into environments, and another big thing, anytime there's usually an anxious kid, there's an anxious parent who hates to see their kid in distress. So a lot of my work is working with the anxious parent too, who has a hard time seeing their kid upset. So an example of that, again, might be I was working about a couple months ago with a kid who was really afraid of the dark and a parent who had a really hard time having their kid in distress. So in one office, I have that child in the dark for 2 minutes using these skills. And in that dark, that child is screaming, Mommy, why don't you love me? I'm unhappy, come save me. And mom has to use those same skills and not go in. But learning to manage some of your own distress is part of this work. And learning, again, not to go home and saying, I just learned, I can't accommodate, I can't assure anymore. You're good luck, you're on your own. But having that light bulb go off and now realize how much you might be doing it, and anywhere you're doing it, thinking yourself in the same way, how am I going to modify this over time? Once I know they have the skills, how is this going to start to look different? So instead of, oh, you don't have to do homework anymore forever, we'll get you a note, we'll get you to a different school that doesn't have homework. Okay, 10 minutes of homework time, 20 minutes of homework time. One class, we're building, we're not doing it. Another thing we know about anxiety is a lot of emotional reactive homes have more anxiety. So learning how to calm your own emotions and regulate is really important as parents. And then the last thing is I say, because we are, and I would say because the media and all that, we are primed on fear all the time. And if you have anxiety yourself, you've already given your gift of your child some genetic loading, and they're anxious enough. And what happens is when we're anxious as parents, then we help stoke that anxiety by pointing out all that can go wrong in any moment. Don't go talk to that person. Don't fall. Don't go up there. Don't do that at that party. Don't do drugs. Don't do this. Don't do that. I'm saying that's still important to talk about, but in balance with an anxious person. What's going to be fun about the party? What's going to go well? What fun can we have? Where is the good stuff? So learning to balance it, and especially if you have an anxious kid, is learning to lean a little more the other way. Their anxiety's already got it. It's already aware of all the dangers. Your job is to help that balance. So that's some tips for parents. So again, knowing when to refer is when you've done all these things on your own, you're trying, and things don't seem to be improving. If you see more avoidance, if that fire starts to seem out of control, or if you're seeing that fire take away more of the things they love. Again, one of my kids loves soccer. If anxiety took soccer away from my kid, I'm getting something involved. If it's, I'm afraid I'm going to have a panic attack, I won't go on the field, I'm afraid the kids are going to make fun of me, whatever it might be, if it's starting to interfere with things they love, getting something involved. And again, if you ever have concerns around their safety, especially more, younger than 10, it's more rare to have mood issues. But whenever you're dealing with a lot of anxiety over 10, there probably is a connective depression piece. And we could talk about that for another time. But when you're dealing with depression, there is more of a likelihood of safety concerns. And if you don't feel comfortable asking, we have another wonderful talk about how to identify and ask those questions that Alex gives all the time, called QPR, right? In that way. But if you're concerned about safety, you have to learn to be able to ask, and if you can't ask, finding someone who could. And those are the big things to see. And know I'm in your corner. On every sheet is my personal work phone number. Or you can email me if you have questions. That's what I'm here to do in my role as Director of Anxiety Programs, to help you, point you in that way. But at the Depression Center itself, we run these great things. We just finished one with, it's up to 6 families. There's these 3-day intensive boot camps where they learn all this stuff and more, and we practice as a family. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So no excuses that it's going to impact school or it's going to get in the way of my work. I can't do it. We all learn it and we practice and we start hitting the ground running. We have individual therapy. We have groups for adults. We want to get some kid groups going in the future. We're building and growing. Another place, again, if you live in this area, a great resource is the International OCD Foundation. Because anxiety work is very similar, if you're dealing with OCD, there's a lot of referrals and therapists there you can click on. They're going to be good and know how to treat anxiety. Or the ADAA also has a list of providers who are sort of known to be good and sort of approved providers that will give good evidence-based treatments. So these are just some resources, and happy to point you in the direction and try to help in any way we can. So you all have been a great audience. you've been with me for a while, and I like to know some learning has occurred. So I call it the stoplight model. And what I mean by that, and you can write it down too on the sheet, but I'd love to hear at least one person from this room to go home. If someone could share one thing they might stop doing based on what they heard today, either personally, as a parent, in their professional role, one thing you might give yourself a pat on the back, I'm doing great, I'm going to keep doing that. And one thing you might start doing today, based on today. So you don't have to share all three, but can one person volunteer and share one thing they might stop doing based on today?
I think, I don't want to say dismissing, but telling my kids, don't worry about it, you'll be great. I keep thinking I'm encouraging them,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's like validating actually the anxiety that they probably have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. One thing someone might keep doing. Yes. Breathing. Awesome. One thing someone might start doing. Be more of a detective. Thank you. You all have been great. One more tip before I turn it over to questions. We have time for that. That just popped in my head. I also recommend for parents just to know what I call form follows function. So what I mean by that is if your kid is dealing with anxiety, is setting aside time where we're working on it. Just in the same way, I bet you all of you make your kids brush their teeth. No matter what, you're brushing your teeth. It could be a bad day, you could be sick, whatever it is, that's a non-negotiable. So in that same way, making sort of the practice, and it can be my favorite time, I want to write a book about this, is sort of conversations in the car. If you have younger kids and you're listening to music, you're missing an opportunity. That's the time to hit this and hit it hard and practice and have fun with it, to make it fun and light, but we're practicing. Or if it's not the car, it could be at the dinner table, one thing that made you anxious and how'd you overcome it today, one worry thought you had today and what could you say back. That could be before bed, we work on our calming skills, but getting into routines and habits, form follows function. And if you don't set that up, it's not going to happen. All right? That was it. Q&A time. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a teenager, I can already see the strong arm up. But I'm going to persevere because you encouraged me to persevere. I'm going to insist on it.
Love it.
But there are times when that anxious brain is totally taken over. And I've also gotten the, those techniques don't work.
Right.
And I don't know how to help.
Beautiful. So the question was, what do you do when you hear from your teen these skills don't work? So I've already shared you can educate them a little bit of why and empower them to understand they're not going to work till we're practicing them, because those moments are not about the time using new things. It's about using the skills you have. And to think of it like a championship performance, that's not the time to try something new. It's to go back to what you've been practicing all year long. But at the same time, what can also help with even teenagers, think, what are the carrots I have? Do they have a car? Do they have privileges? Are there things they want to do? And you can tie that to some of this practice. But also as parents, so another thing I do, because I have a younger kid and soccer is really passionate about, so I coached my kid's soccer team. So what I talk about, imagine in that way, I'm working in practice with these guys on throw-ins and we're doing it ad nauseum. And then we get into the game and guess what? They don't throw it in well. I can't say timeout right there and start from scratch. I'm making a mental note. We still got some work to do. We still have some practicing to do. So what I mean by that is if you're not seeing it translate into the game, it just means we have more practice to do. And it's not about trying to do it in that moment. It's filing it away. That moment, they're going to do what they're going to do. But going, we have more work to do on this, and we have to practice maybe lower level conditions, If what they're freaking out about is this, let's practice it more, let's hit it more, and we know we're effective when the next time that big thing rolls around and they're handling it differently. So that's some of the tips. But it's really hard, especially with teenagers, because that tiger and how they show that tiger to you can get really big and scary for you too. Yes?
So my daughter, when I try to talk to her, says, I don't want to talk about this. It makes me anxious. I don't want to talk about it. So I can't even like get into a conversation about it because she's like,
Right.
I don't even know how to start.
So what I would say, again, one of my favorite, so I'm a nerd, and there's this Hall of Fame of psychologists. And one of my favorite psychologists is this guy named Yalom. And one of his favorite lines is attack while the iron is cold, or strike while the iron is cold. So that's not the moment to try. That's the cobras in the room, and all you can say is, let's try to calm down, let's get you okay and manage it. But when they're calm, let's go back and talk about it. And if she still says it, I would say, your anxiety has too much a hold of you. We need to do something about this. If you can't do this with me, let's find you someone who can help you better do that. And helping them get to that place where they can. But another metaphor that I give is think of, a lot of times stress and anxiety get confused, but think of it kind of like water in a dam. And they've been building up that water and keeping it so full that when they start to open it up, it comes out so intense, they want to close it up again. But that's what causes the problem. And so what you can do as a parent is just say, I want to help. If I can't help you, let's find someone who can help you get through this. But this is not the solution, not talking about it. It's just going to keep it going and make it worse. So, yeah, hard. This is not easy stuff. Yes?
On one of your slides for treatment options, you have individual intensive.
Yes.
Could you explain that?
So a lot of times when you find someone like me, and usually it's, I want to stay in my school, I'm at a school, I want to stay on track. They don't want to miss anything. And so, or the anxiety is so intense, it's really interfering. So we have the ability at our center to see people daily, 3 times a week. Because remember, this is all skills and practice. So the more we meet, the quicker you can get those skills, the quicker we can get them in you. And that's where that boot camp comes in. So it's just the kind of meeting the frequency of what the issues are. And a lot of times, once a week anxiety treatment is not enough if they've met someone like me. Because I see the most difficult of most difficult, and it requires more therapy. Yeah, it can be really hard, but that's where a lot of times I approach working, it's a team approach, and depending on how old the child is, you know, if you're dealing with a 17-year-old who in a year from now is about to go to college, we want to help them individuate and find their own voice. But a 12-year-old or 11-year-old, we want it to be much more team focused. So it depends on the age of how much people do that. But if that's happening, I would recommend to the therapist is how do we work together to break this cycle and make it so it feels more like a team and not me ratting out my son or child, and it feels a little more like no one's getting the full picture. And so maybe some family kind of talk about that. But your parent input is really important because remember, anxious people don't like to have the spotlight. So they sometimes just say what they think that therapist wants to hear or what will get them out of the room because they don't want to be there. So it does involve a lot of times the parents. And so a lot of times too, what I do with kids who I know this is we literally will go on Power Schools or My Cherry Creek schools and we learn to verify if I can't trust you. First, I want to trust, and trust is started and given. But if there's reason to not trust, now we have to change how we work. Yeah? Good question. It's tough. Yes.
Do you find that there's often a lot of shame that goes with anxiety?
There can be, and especially around the sense of, why can't I do something that seems so easy for other people? Why is this hard for me when all my friends or other people can do it what seems so easily? So there can be some of that. I see a little bit more of that with sort of depression and stuff. Anxiety, it's a little easier to talk about, but there still can be that component. And again, anxious people, one thing I also know, anxious people hate to talk about their anxiety or let people know they're anxious. So that's part of the work I do, is helping them learn to advocate and talk about it. Because a whole other piece of this is, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute, but our society hasn't done a good job at helping people understand that it could be a mental health issue. So just a quick example of that, imagine you are all teachers and you have a kid who barely comes to class, doesn't turn in their work, sits in the back, never raises their hand, and you even email them to see how they're doing, and they don't respond. What's probably going to be your automatic response in your head? They don't care, they think they're better than school, they're a slacker. We never jump to, oh, they're dealing with debilitating anxiety. That's not what pops in our head. So that problem of that shame and stuff keeps people from helping others be empathetic and want to help. And so we have to learn to break that. Another one is at a party, if you have social anxiety, you're looking more unhappy, you look a little miserable, you're not talking, you're more quiet. What do people think about you if you're not having fun and not enjoying at a party? They don't think, oh, you're anxious. They think you're stuck up. They think you're better than people. So it really is important to learn how to advocate, but our society doesn't do a good job at helping people even think about that first. So kind of as a dovetail to that, that's a lot of the work, is learning to help paint the picture. But when people do, you usually get a lot of support and understanding. What I found. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of anti-anxiety medication?
So again, what we know, depending on the severity of anxiety, that combination can be good. There are certain medications, though, that are designed for anxiety that can be highly addictive, called benzodiazepines, and give you a little happy kick when you take them, so they get even more addictive. And in that way, we know those are basically teaching you the only way you can handle this is through medication. So we don't want you to, someone like myself would say that's not the front line. But if it helps you in the beginning to help starting approach and break this vicious cycle, we might use it, but then we have work to get off of it. So I try to start without it, and then if we need to have something we can add to the mix. And then, because some people with moderate to severe anxiety, the evidence shows the combo of the two and the right meds can make a big difference, depending on the type of anxiety. Great questions. You all have been a wonderful audience. Have a wonderful night, and get in that pool.